I'm Catherine Falk. Thank you for joining us. Whenever you're here, you are in good company. This season, we are partnering with the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce on a new series called Leading by Example, where we will highlight important topics in leadership and the work regional leaders and companies are doing to make Virginia the best place to live, work, and do business. The first group we will highlight are champions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we're thrilled to have us as our guest today, Gregory Washington, who became president of George Mason University, Virginia's largest and most diverse public university, in July 2020. Prior to this, he was the engineering dean at Ohio State University and also at the University of California, Irvine. An accomplished researcher, he specializes in dynamic systems with an emphasis on modeling and control of smart material structures and systems. President Washington's current board service includes many prestigious corporations and councils, including the Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce. A first-generation college student and graduate, he is a native of New York City and attended high school in North Carolina. He also earned his bachelor's, master's, and his PhD from North Carolina State University. President Washington, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
Tell us about your passion for diversity, equity, and inclusion and where that came from.
Well, it comes from multiple sources, but if I were to highlight and focus in on one, I can tell it to you in a story. I was a undergraduate student at NC State University, taking very difficult classes in the engineering college. And we had TAs that we struggled to understand. And it became a problem with all of the students in the program. And a group of us said, we're going to go and talk to the dean about it. And so about 8 of us file into the dean's office. We go and we say, let's have a discussion about the fact that we need more English speaking American TAs so we can just understand them in the classroom. The dean explained to us that it was hard to get Americans to go to graduate school for engineering at that time. It was an issue, and that they were working on it, and that he promised to do better. And as the students were leaving his office, he tapped me on the shoulder and asked me to come back in. And at that point, I'm like, uh-oh, I'm getting ready to get kicked out of school. But what he did, he said, look, I looked at your grades. I've seen what you can accomplish in the classroom. And right now you can make a decision to be part of the problem or part of the solution. If you promise to go and get a PhD, I can guarantee you that you will not pay a dime to go to school. And in fact, we will pay you. I was a sophomore at the time. And I took him up on that. And the reality of that situation is that set me on a path that was very different than the path I was on previously. And I saw what an administrator can do relative to helping a person like me who never had anybody in there in his immediate family go to college, actually go on to get a PhD. And that ignited a passion in me. I said, if he can do that for me, I can do that for others. I can engage others. And then I began to have mentors along the way, all of which instilled something else in me to help me along the way. And so I see it as a debt that must be paid. If people didn't do the things for me that I needed for success, I may not be here today. And so I don't have the right not to do that for others. And so the passion is personal.
That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that. I know you came into George Mason at the beginning of the pandemic, but I have to say, despite that, you've accomplished so much already. Tell us about what George Mason University is doing in this area. Are there any best practices you can share?
Well, look, you led the segment off by stating that George Mason is the largest and most diverse institution 4-year in the state of Virginia. And in that, we actually see some of the positive outcomes we've had. We don't just have lots of students here of all nationalities and all backgrounds, but we actually graduate them at a very high rate. More than 70% of the students who enter George Mason graduate. And here's an interesting fact about that. No matter what group you are from, no matter what ethnic group, whether you're Asian, African American, Latino, you all graduate at about the same graduation rate. So I can look any parent in the eye and say, your kid has a similar chance of graduating from George Mason as any other kid that would come to the university and pursue a degree. That is national leading. It is a very difficult thing to do to maintain that level of outcome and to maintain that level of effectiveness in terms of graduation rate amongst students from different groups. So that's another. We have a host of programs and initiatives in place. We have, as you all may have heard, the advanced program that basically is one of the best transfer pathways in the country. More than 3,000 students at Northern Virginia Community College. More than 60% of those students are from diverse communities. They enter into George Mason and they graduate with more than an 80% graduation rate. And when you juxtapose that to students outside of the advanced framework who start in community college and get a 4-year degree later, that number is less than 20%. So less than 20% in any other place outside of George Mason start off with in community college with a hope of getting a degree and don't get it. Whereas at George Mason, it's 80%. And so that again it's just another great outcome. We have many more. We have an EIP program where we engage young people starting in the 8th grade. We have hundreds of students in that program, and we start with them in the 8th grade. We make an agreement with their families that if your child goes through, takes these classes, maintains this GPA, that you will get admitted into George Mason, and oftentimes you will have a scholarship waiting for you on the back end. And so all of these kinds of initiatives are what gives us the success that we have today.
That's fabulous. And I know you also have a huge number of students who are the first in their family to graduate as well.
More than 30% of our students are first gen. And that's another big deal for us, right? We actually are drawn to those students that are first gen, that are low income, that may be the stone that many of the builders from academic institutions don't want to use. That's our base. Those are the students we engage. We're most comfortable in dealing with those students, and they perform well at George Mason. We're highly successful in getting them out the back end.
That's great. What's your advice to companies and business leaders in Northern Virginia about what they can do to positively impact diversity, equity, and inclusion today and in the future?
Well, first and foremost, CEO does not stand for Chief Executive Officer. CEO is the Chief Equity Officer in any organization. The buck stops with the leader. And that intentionality, and I claim that we all must be intentional about ensuring inclusivity in the workplace and in what we do. But it's that intentionality and purpose of making sure that what we do and what we say on a day-to-day equals the outcomes that we want to have, right? We think about it this way. Everybody knows the right answers to the question. Diversity is important. Inclusivity is important. Equity is important. But what actually matters is who you give jobs to, who you give opportunities to, who you progress in your organizations, and how well you position and help those individuals perform. That's equity and inclusion, right? And so it's not what we say, it's what we do, and we have to be intentional about those outcomes.
That's great. I know our viewers can learn more at novachamber.org and click on the DE&I tab, and also about George Mason University at gmu.edu. Before we wrap up, I got to ask you your three favorites: your favorite book, your favorite extracurricular activity, and your favorite restaurant.
Favorite book still to this day is The Hobbit by J.R. Tolkien. Favorite restaurant in this area now is it's a tie, actually. It's between Joe's Steak and Seafood in DC, and right here in Northern Virginia, a restaurant called Trio. And what was the third question?
Your favorite extracurricular activity.
Favorite extracurricular activity is hiking.
Awesome. I thought you were going to say Mason basketball, but I know that's on your list.
That's a favorite pastime.
Oh, I got it. President Washington, thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your passion.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.